Welcome to the Tim Castle Show, where I sit down with courageous individuals doing inspirational things around the world. Whether it's AI, crypto, mindset, leadership, negotiation and sales, I've got you covered. I sit at that nexus of disruption and change. I'm loving every second of this. I really do believe this is the most abundant time that we've lived in. And if we harness what's going on correctly, we can build businesses that are going to transform our future and your lives. So come with me on this journey, meet the people. I pull back the curtain, I find out who they really are. I started off building this podcast for my sons as something they could look back on later in life and see the conversations that their dad had with people that he respected and admired, but most of all, get the lessons. And now I'm sharing those lessons with you and the reasons that people have done things, the ambition, the passion, and the hardship and their vulnerabilities. And I actually really enjoy it. This is one of the most special times as I get to sit down with people that I really would love to chat to and ask them the questions that are burning in my mind. If you are the same as me and you're pushing the limits and the edges of what you do, please like and subscribe to the show. It helps me tremendously to get new guests on the show and expand that reach so we can help more people together. Joining me today is Gary Rivlin. He's a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist. He's worked for several different publications that you'll know, including the New York Times and Wired. He's authored 11 books, I believe. Is that right, Gary?
That's right.
11 books. And the title I've just read is AI Valley, and it was phenomenal. It's definitely a book I recommend you get, especially if you're into Gen AI and understanding Silicon Valley and how things are evolving and the rapid pace of change that we now face. His topics tend to be social fault lines, inequality, race, poverty, and the like. And as I said, you've cautioned about some of the risks about autonomous agents and operating with minimal oversight from humans. You've won 2 Gerald Loeb Awards honoring your business journalism. I am thrilled, absolutely thrilled. I've been waiting for this conversation all day, Gary. I am thrilled to have you here on the show. Your book is phenomenal. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for that intro, and I'm looking forward to this. Let's have fun.
Let's do that. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. So to set the stage and to really open up this conversation, now, Gary, you've covered a lot of Silicon Valley, especially within the years of the dotcom bubble. Well, what is different about the AI boom specifically? What made you want to dive into that?
Right. So actually, some of it was that I did cover from the mid-1990s, the rise of the internet, the dot-com boom, and the dot-com bust, and then, of course, the revival in the 2000s. And, there are obvious parallels, the hype, the excitement. To me, OpenAI and ChatGPT was Netscape and its browser, like kind of the starter's pistol. But there are some difference. First off, when the internet came about, there wasn't like this harsh negative reaction to it. Like, people embraced it, and over time, like, oh, what's this going to do to attention spans and immediate gratification? But that took time. At first, everyone was just really optimistic, like, oh, it's going to shrink the world, give us access to all the information in the world. And so probably overhyped or at least over optimistic about it. But when AI came out, it scared us, right? I mean, humans might lose their apex status as the smartest entity on Earth. We've all seen science fiction movies where the robots take over and subjugate humanity. So the negative reaction that immediately there were those who were the bloomers, the optimistic accelerationists, but just as strong. At least here in the U.S., I see it a lot, are the doomers, the negative. Like, they did a poll in the U.S., like, more than half the people are fearful of AI rather than excited about AI. That was not what was happening with the internet. And one other big difference is there was a lot of money thrown at startups by investors, venture capitalists during the dot-com years, but it does not compare. Not on the same planet with AI. Like in 1995, 1996, it was $10 billion, which used to be a big number. Now it's something like $300 billion being invested in AI startups. There are a few that are getting a large share of that, $40 billion for OpenAI a few months back. But there's a lot of money, and there's a lot of investors chasing there's this database that shows there's 5,000 would-be angel investors in AI and 3,000 investors in early stage. And like in the old days, in the dot-com age, might have been a few hundred of each.
Right. Yeah. So it's just exponentially bigger on all scales, in all ways and all dimensions. So how is that venture capital shaping AI innovation? Are we seeing genuine breakthroughs, or is it all hype?
Well, I think there's a lot of hype, but there are breakthroughs. But this is the way venture capital works. It's a hits business. For every 10 investments a VC will make, if they have one huge hit, that's a great track record. Maybe one or two will do okay, make 3, 5, 10x. But most of them will fail. And so most of the companies we're reading about, most of the companies that have raised millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, even billions, are going to fail. But that's venture capital. It's like let's let the gladiators compete. And is it going to be Anthropic's Claude, Google's Gemini, though that's not venture backed, ChatGPT, XAI, their Grok, that's Elon Musk. No one knows, but we are seeing amazing breakthroughs. What's so interesting watching it is there's this game of leapfrog. Gemini, Google puts out Gemini, and it's on the leaderboard. It's the best, but it could do all this range of things. And then comes ChatGPT based on GPT-5, and it leapfrogs over it. So I still think we're seeing lots of breakthroughs, whether it's chat, video, agents, all that. I think the problem, and this is what happens when you raise tens of millions, hundreds of millions, of billions, you're over-promising. I saw this happen during the internet era. Everything that was promised during the internet era came true, and then more, but not in a few months, not next year. It sometimes takes 10 or 15 years for this stuff to seep in, whether it's our personal lives, our business lives, and education. I think the same thing with the AI. 2025 is supposed to be the year of the AI agents. No, it's not going to be. It's not, mounting up that way. There's still technological challenges to making these agents work, whether in a business context or a personal context. So again, AGI, artificial general intelligence, are right around the corner. I still think we're some years away from that, but it's coming. I guess my point is I would argue it's both overhyped and underhyped. There's this human tendency to overstate the short-term impact of a technology, but underestimate the long-term impact of a technology. I think that's what's going on here.
Yeah, and you're quite right. And in the book, you do call out these beautiful narratives and these stories. What I love about you is you come in with this truth-seeking nature, and I followed the book, and I just feel like every character I got to know them. So things like when you were talking about Mustafa Suleiman and his prediction for AGI, and thinking about 2028, and people are making these big claims, and they're going with it, right? And you've got such a different backdrop or setup with the kind of Silicon Valley big tech that you covered, in that these guys have piles of cash.
Right.
And like the partnership with OpenAI and Microsoft, that's cool. Just explaining how that happened, and strategically it kind of adds more value to both businesses.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, a few things. First of all, you mentioned Mustafa Suleiman. He's the co-founder of the main company I'm following Inflection. In the book, he's kind of AI royalty. He co-founded DeepMind out of London, which to me was the first great machine learning startup, the first startup to figure out how to cash it. They sold to Google in 2014 for $650 million. But actually, he deliberately does not talk about artificial general intelligence. He thinks it's a great distraction. Let's make these bots work. Let's give them a personality, and let's make them useful and likable, is more his thrust. And he thinks all this talk of super intelligence, artificial general AGI, are a distraction. It's funny with this book. When I first started, I think you're right. I kind of go in and try to explore it. I use different characters to tell the story of, investors and founders. But my miscalculation, and the same thing happened with dotcom, is I got so fascinated by the startups, thinking who's going to be the next Google? Who's going to be the next Facebook? And I realized this stuff is so expensive. To hire talent is millions of dollars a year. Top talents, hundreds of millions of dollars deals. To operate these things, when I first started, it was like millions or tens of millions. Now it's billions of dollars to train and operate these things. So it's not really kind of a game that lends itself to the startup world. So what I ended up figuring out is the next Google is probably Google, and the next Facebook Meta is Meta, because they have the data, they have the money, they have, I think Google, I looked up a few months ago, they have $100 billion in cash on hand. A startup has to go, hat in hand to try to raise those billions of dollars. Google just has to like reach down and grab 10 billion and fund their next effort.
So are there any hidden power breakers like in the new economy from a startup, ones we don't hear about? Because obviously we hear about Altman and Musk and the like, but are there any hidden ones?
Well, we've all heard of it, but to me, NVIDIA is so interesting because so in the US is this whole thing. So there's the 1849, the California gold rush, and the joke is who got rich. Who got rich off the gold rush? Well, a few individuals did, but the people that really got rich were the people selling the pans and the pickaxes. Levi Strauss, that's where they founded. They gave him the genes that you could work out, and mine for gold. So to me, will it be Anthropic? Will it be OpenAI? Who knows? But I'll tell you, Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, we've all heard of them, but there's an aspect to their business that we don't talk about. Google has Gemini. They're trying to win the chatbot wars. They have a whole range of products, but they also are the host, they're the cloud hosts for a gazillion companies trying to win this game. So in other words, they're both mining for gold and they're selling the pickaxes. The same with Microsoft, the same with Amazon. Amazon is far, far, far behind in the AI wars, whether to be the chatbot everyone wants. Like Alexa doesn't quite have the skill of a ChatGPT, to say the least, but they're still making tons of money. I mean, tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue coming in because they're hosting, whether it's for an Anthropic that needs, the chips, the computer power to train and operate, or for a gazillion companies out there that are using more and more and more of these data centers. They're using more and more of the cloud to run their own AI that they're using within. So to me, they're the secret power brokers. We all know their names, but they have this other element to this business that isn't getting much attention.
I see. Yeah. There's a whole other world or ecosystem that supports it, much like Levi's jeans and the gold rush. Did you see the article today in Bloomberg and the FT saying that NVIDIA chips won't able to be sold to China and that they're going to have to rely on domestic chip making? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I don't know what to make of that. I wonder if that's a temporary gambit because China and the US are battling their assignment thing. Like, okay, good. I mean, like NVIDIA makes the best chips for AI right now, and China's going to be cut off. But our president does change his minds, and so I do wonder if in 2 months that'll be yesterday's news. But I'll remind people earlier this year with DeepSeek, like the Chinese didn't have access to the best NVIDIA chips, and they still don't have access to the very best NVIDIA chips. They're like kind of, let's call them the second best, or not as good as the best. And what was that? Invention is the mother of necessity, or necessity is the mother of invention. Where like they didn't have the best chips, so they had to come up with this very clever way of creating a model that was less compute intensive. And so DeepSeek really kind of rattled the markets because it's a Chinese backed company. It's got venture capital, it has chips, it has money. It wasn't just like two kids in a dorm room. But on the other hand, they didn't have access to the best chips, and they had to come up with a very clever workaround that used much less compute to give as good or almost as good an output as these models running on the best chips in these huge data center farms.
Yeah, right. It's almost like the geopolitical landscape creates competition, which then creates innovation and workarounds and breakthroughs and the like. But it's just super interesting, and the pace that this is going at is just phenomenal, right? It's just phenomenal. I think Do you think we're moving too fast? I know that the book talks about this, but for deploying AI with enough guardrails and the ethics side of things.
Yeah, I in mid 2023, I was feeling optimistic about this, right? I mean, like, so Sam Altman went to the U.S. Senate and said, please create regulations, please create basic guardrails here, and kind of in the U.S. In the EU, they did put down basic guardrails. Well, 2025, new presidential administration, Trump, first day in office, second day in office, got rid of those guardrails. I mean, they're kind of basic. Like, if you put out one of these large models, you have to test it first. You have to red team it. You have to kind of hire outsiders to see where the vulnerabilities are, and you need to share the results. We're not going to prove it, but you just have to approve it, but you're going to have to share the results. They got rid of those. I was hopeful that ChatGPT, like, AI has been around. All of us have been using AI for a long time. You use Google Translate, that's been around since around 2015. That's AI. Suggestion engines. You like this movie, you might like that movie. That's AI. Autocorrect. All these different ways we've been using AI. But ChatGPT, when it came out at the end of 2022, is different. It wasn't behind the glass. It wasn't this invisible thing. You're talking to it. You're like, wow, this is like magic. I could have a conversation with the computer. And I thought because of that, we would have the conversation like, okay, what should we let this do and not let it do? Like, should we use AI for warfare? Should we use AI for surveillance? You mentioned it when you introduced me, like, a big thing with me is autonomous AI. These things are amazing, but they're not good enough to run autonomously. They have a PhD like knowledge of all these specialties and subspecialties, but they don't understand a thing. I mean, a 5-year-old knows things that these models don't know. So they're a useful tool, but my construct, the way I wish people thought about this is like, it's a co-pilot, it's a tool, it's a camera, it's a hammer. I mean, it'll help you do what you want to do better, but being in charge of things, like, I guess corporations, like, okay, read these data and look for, anomalies, give us warning. There are ways where autonomous AI is no big deal. But autonomous AI making decisions, I think people are fooled by how, let's say, articulate it is. I play with it, I use it all the time for work, and it really is sometimes feels like alchemy, like just miraculous. However, it's severely limited. I wish we were having these kind of dialogues around warfare, surveillance. There's biases baked in. Like, it's trained on us. I mean, sometimes people are shocked, like, oh my God, it's expressing, nihilistic angst. Like, well, it's read our literature. There's a lot about that. So it's just a reflection of us in every way, including whatever biases we have are now baked into the training. And so, you see people talking about using it for sifting through job applications, or to, hand down sentencing for someone convicted of a crime. That scares me. I wish we were having that conversation. The optimism I felt in 2023 has gone poof. And now I feel like we're just frittering away. Like, the technology is speeding ahead, as technology tends to do once it hits a point. And society, schools, government, policymakers are not keeping up.
Yeah, I don't know if it was you, but I read something recently about like AI agents and then the evolution of how this will go in terms of surveillance. And obviously, so living here in Singapore and being more in the East, there is, well, I was at the Fortune AI conference a couple of months ago here in Singapore, and one of the stats was just saying how much more optimistic the East was about the applications of AI and the use of AI versus the West. But at the same time, when you speak how you're speaking around the fact that the things that people jump to are surveillance, like being able to shut down a school the moment someone pulls out a gun, and being able to kind of control situations that and be the police in a way, and then trigger different things. Like, it will be a completely new world. Do you see that part? We're not good enough yet to be able to do that at speed or skill, or where is the agent kind of line?
Yeah, I love that idea of, kind of AI surveillance inside a school, and someone takes out a weapon. Not that it does anything, it immediately alerts a human being. So then a human being, because I mean, what AI is fantastic about is it's always on 24/7. It can pay attention to vast stores of data that, no single human, no group of humans, can do well. But I wish it was more a tool. And by the way, I've been speaking somewhat negatively about AI. I kind of lean optimistic on AI. I think AI is just going to do extraordinary things for healthcare. I think it's going to do extraordinary things for science. I think it has the potential to really help with education. I could kind of dive into any of those, but I its ability to like constantly be on and monitoring, whether like kind of for smell of like, oh, there's a dangerous chemical, gas leak or something. It could be an early warning system. I mean, so there are extraordinary things that AI. One of my favorites is that there are all these kind of languages that are facing extinctions by indigenous groups here in the US, Indian tribes, Native Americans, and they're learning the language. There might be one or two people left and they're in the 90s who know this language, but the AI learns the language and it'll keep it alive forever. So this is a long list of things that I think could do, where AI is going to do really positive, good things. But I think we need to be deliberate about it. Every technology ever cuts both ways. The cars, gave us freedom. The cars give us pollution, and here in the U.S., 35, 40,000 people a year die in car accidents. And so AI will be, the television, whatever. AI is going to be the same. There are positives and there are negatives. And I feel like if we were being more deliberate, if our policymakers were discussing it more, if we were kind of as a society, as a planet, kind of talking about how do we use these things, what are the limits of these things, or at least what are the limits right now, given where the state of the technology is. And so, I am scared just because runaway AI with no controls can do great damage. One last, Stephen Hawking, 2016, I think he said the greatest quote, like, AI is either going to be the greatest thing for humanity, the worst thing for humanity. We just don't know yet. I think it's a little bit over dramatic. I think the truth will be somewhere in the middle. But I think what he was getting at is like, okay, the technology is great. What are we going to do with it? What are we going to let it do?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And your book, I really recommend that people grab a copy of AI Valley, because the way you lay it out, and you go back years, you go back right to the beginning, you talk about the AI winters that have been here, and you really help set the scene for anyone that hasn't understood and just feels like this has come out of nowhere. You kind of go through the different parts of it. And I think another part that was really interesting is just, like you said, the biomedical piece, like the fact that a specialist might see 30,000 cases in a lifetime, and that's their data to go off, versus an AI that can look at it like millions of data and then patch a disease in progress because it's pattern recognition and all of that. Like, it's so cool.
Right. So yeah, I think an AI's ability to, read an X-ray or any kind of imaging is a perfect example. Long ago, we've gotten to the point where they're more accurate than a human doctor. Spotting the breast cancer, the early signs of a breast cancer or something like that. But again, I think it's a great tool. I want my doctor using AI to read my pathology report, to see if it could kind of unearth something that he or she can't spot with their eyes, or doesn't have the millions of cases like an AI would have. But I still want the doctor. I still, again, it's a tool. And by the way, on the history, it's interesting. So as you point out, I go back to like the 40s and 50s, to the earliest days of AI. And what was so interesting to me is the overselling of it, the hyping of it, goes back all the way. Like, so there's this famous conference in 1956 at Dartmouth College here in the States, where in fact, the fellow who coined artificial intelligence, he'd done the year before, he was there as the best computer scientists, mathematicians, paying attention to this stuff. They predicted that within, this is in the 1950s, mid-1950s, within 10 years, there'll start to be applications of AI that businesses use. AI will be able to beat the best chess champion on the world within 10 years. It took 40 plus years from that point on. So like this idea of overselling it, and it hurts the cause. GPT-5 came out, and like I use it on, it's the one I've been using the last few weeks. It's amazing. It's so fast. It's so good. It really is an improvement. However, Sam Altman, kind of hyped it so much. He kind of put images like he was going to explode the world. He's talking about artificial general intelligence. That this is going to be like this remarkable breakthrough that's just going to blow people away. Like, no, it's a very good advance. It's GPT-5 is in fact, an improvement on GPT-4. It fell short of his hype, and so he gets criticized. It's seen as a disappointment when, like, well, if you had just said like this stuff is really amazing and it's getting better every year, as opposed to like, oh, these things are gonna run our businesses and be smarter than us, next month. They create the circumstance where they fall short. And that has been the trend with AI in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s. AI has been just around the next corner for like 70 years. It finally arrived in the 2020s.
Yeah, that's it. It's almost like humans, we worry about loss, or we find loss more problematic than the positive, right? It affects us so much more. So anything lower than what Sam Altman is pitching is going to be a negative. What would be your advice to, because it feels like every company, every startup, like I'm in the tech world, everyone's doing AI in some way, shape, or form. What would your advice be, given that we've got these essentially 5 or 6 big, like there's probably 10 big models out there, or 10 potential models out there that have, let's say, like unlimited resources, the ability to create a flywheel to then be able to fund the next leg, and the data? What would your advice be to the rest of us that are building and want to build with AI and augment with it, like you say, to kind of use it?
Yeah, so I would break it down into 2 buckets basically. So what you're talking about with the 10 or so companies with unlimited, right? They're building the foundational models, and so it's the large language model or the model for video creation, image creation. That's very, very expensive. Doing that means you're going to be taking on Google and or Meta and or Microsoft, etc. Or even OpenAI. I don't know what to make of OpenAI. It's a startup, right? I mean, like, it's not publicly traded. It's 10 years old, but it has a paper worth of $500 billion. If you rank the largest corporations on earth by market cap, it's in like the top 20. So this startup is one of the 20 most valuable companies, on the planet, but anyway. And so there's that bucket, and like, that's a hard battle to join. However, this second bucket, there's a gazillion opportunities. To me, I mean, maybe it's not going to be a Google next $1 trillion company. Maybe we're talking about, millions of dollars, then tens and then hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue. Maybe you hit $1 billion as opposed to a Google, which is making hundreds of billions of dollars. But, there's all these different levels of the stack. There's all these, kind of, for making data work together. There's all that kind of technical behind the scenes. And, the thing I'm paying more attention to in recent days is kind of the different, let's call them verticals, the different, industries. Like, I'm making one maximize for the law. There's, several companies doing that. I'm doing one, just to help create images for presentations. I'm doing one that helps with creating spreadsheets. So to me, there's a million niche opportunities out there that venture capitalists will fund, except for the goal isn't with an Anthropic or an OpenAI 100x or more. The goal is more a 3x, a 5x, a 10x. That they put in their money, and there's a very nice outcome, but your company doesn't join the pantheon. Let's say Airbnb, Uber, or higher. There's hundreds of publicly traded tech companies. There's thousands of tech companies that are making money and making money for their investors, their founders, their employees. But we don't really talk about them. So in the book, I'm kind of looking at what's the next $1 trillion company. I was looking at those going for the gold, where they ended up, because they're crowded up by Google and Microsoft, because what I was talking about before, this stuff is so expensive. But a startup I was following, they came up with AI-powered search, an AI native search model in 2019, long before everyone else. They're taking on Google. These two outsiders with, one has a very thin resume, but not exactly like, oh, they used to run blah, blah, blah at Microsoft kind of thing. And they're taking on, and I was hanging out with them. They're a really interesting company called Andi, A-N-D-I. And, I asked, like, well, search is $1 trillion industry. Like, maybe you just want your 2% share, right? Go for some niche. Like, we'll go for, kind of a certain age group of people went like, and they were looking at me like, are you crazy? No, we're taking on Google. We don't want 2% market share, even though that's what's 2% of $1 trillion. It's 20 million. Do my math for me, please. But it's like, that seemed like a nice opportunity to me, but they were aiming, they were shooting the moon, and so in the book, I look at that. But with that said, there's still like all these companies that barely get any attention in the media and the tech, blogs or whatever, still doing really, really interesting things. So again, I've just put them in two buckets: the shoot for the moon bucket, and everyone else. There's still, to me, plenty of opportunity.
Yeah, what was really cool in the book, and I loved your investigating about, was Microsoft and their journey and how they used to be quite ruthless back in the day. And I know you've obviously done a lot of work with with Bill Gates and exploring that before, but some of the tactics of shipping products even before they weren't ready, and then working the employees super hard so that then they would fix all the bugs on the fly, and stealing ideas and doing all of these things and these tactics to kind of get there. And then it kind of, the conversation flipped to a BC lens. When a startup comes in, they go, well, what about if Microsoft takes on your kind of vantage point or your game? Would they destroy you? Is that the same thing with this? Like, are VCs asking, what if Google or Meta goes into this and just flicks a switch and suddenly?
Yes, that's very much going on. Probably they're saying Google, because Google and OpenAI. What's interesting about those two companies in particular is like, they're trying to do everything. It's like, it's not just the chatbot, which there's a group of companies that most of us have heard of, kind of competing in that sphere. They're doing, both companies, video models, image generators. Google Google's doing AI search. OpenAI announced that they're doing AI powered search. A browser. They announced that, I didn't even get this one, they're going to take on LinkedIn for that, aspect of it, for kind of your, professional life. And so these companies are really going into everybody. OpenAI is looking at robotics, they're looking at chips. And so that does come up. Like, you go pitch a venture capitalist, like, how do you know, as you say it, well, like, they're not just going to just flip a switch. Yeah.
Today I want to share something that's incredibly close to my heart. It's this book here in my hands. It's The First Domino. I wrote this to help you expand into new markets, to make the most of your first 90 days. Whether it's a new role that you've started, whether it's a new team that you've taken on, or your company has launched a new product or service, or you're just a founder and you really haven't landed that first major client yet. Imagine this: you're starting a new job and you're sitting down and you're opening up your computer and you've got 43 new Slack messages, a ton of new emails and content that you've got to learn. The pressure's on. Not only that, but you've got to go out and you've got to meet all these new people, these new staff members, these new clients. But most of all, you've got to add value. And whether you acknowledge it or not, you know the pressure is on. You know that this time is precious and that this company has brought you on for a reason. And you're there to prove that reason. That's one of the reasons I wrote this book. It's something that you can read on the weekend and implement on Monday to guide that process so that you can systematize the process of excelling and bring those trusted relationships forward and move the needle on landing your first major client. This book is going to push you to do anything but be comfortable. It's going to help you get breakthroughs. If we tip that first domino, we're going to get a chain reaction of success. That's why I wrote it. It's a playbook to understand the psychology of sales, the intelligence that you need to build leverage into your sales process. And it's for anyone that wants to do business development, growth, or just build their personal brand and take ownership of the direction of their career, their money, and their life. When you land that first domino, that first major client, I want you to post it up and tag me. If you are bold enough to take on the challenge, to really put it into action, to lead with heart, I promise you, you will change your stars. So if you're looking to create a generational legacy and make an impact, this is the first domino, and it only takes one.
Yeah. Okay. So what myths do you think are out there that need to be punctured right now? Like, in terms of AI, like what's going on that's not really real?
I guess I come back first to the point I made before, like we give it too much power. We are fooled. It sounds like a human, and so therefore in our heads it could do all these things. It can help you make a decision, but I don't want it making important decisions. We're seeing, something we're all going to have to get used to is people having deep romantic relationships with these bots. But, we're seeing that there was AI psychosis, they are calling this now, that, these AIs, they try to please so much that whenever you say they're going to help you, even if it's like, I want to kill myself, help me pick out the rope. And so, I literally that happened, but it's we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're giving these things too much of a central role in our life when they're still a work in progress. I mean, if I had to say where we are on AI, I'd say we're like 1997 internet wise, maybe 1998. Still things are going. I guess that implies there might be a bubble bursting. I could see the likes of Google, Microsoft stock taking a hit because, they overbuilt. They invested too much into data centers. They're spending so much money on these models, and they're not really making, let me change that. They are not making profits. Like OpenAI, let's give them credit. 3 years ago, they had, virtually zero revenue. They're on schedule to make about $13 billion in revenue. So they're making real money. Those are big numbers for a company. However, they're losing tons of money. I mean, Altman, said it's like he anticipates spending $100 billion in a couple of years. Well, only bringing in $13 billion. So eventually, Wall Street, investors are going to grow fed up. But I do think we're still in that early primordial stage where all these interesting things are still bubbling up, but it's still a very young technology. We're not anywhere near where it is going to be or where it needs to be to invest the kind of power over personal lives, over business that we're investing in these models.
Okay, so I got this right. It's that we're giving it too much power right away. And that's from our optimism. That's from our kind of gung-ho attitude to this, just keep feeding it. And yet the data that we're probably building these things on is biased. It comes essentially from humans, and therefore it incorporates the situation that we have right now. Like the example of the rope, it's going to look for ways to help you out when it should know not to do that, and perhaps to advise you against doing that and try to figure out what's wrong. Like, is that a symptom? Have we not learned from things in the past, like the dotcom bubble? Like, or do we know this bubble is coming and this is just part of it, and then we're going to crash, and then we buy the dip and we go again? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about human nature. Like, many people are fearful of it, but there's enough people who are optimistic and kind of embracing this thing that they forget as humans we overestimate the short term here. But it's I think we're a breakthrough or two away. So let's go back to 2017. They're starting to have fun with chatbots. Microsoft had put out this famously Tay, a chatbot in 2015. It was a total mess. Within 24 hours, it was a Hitler saluting, racist, anti-Semitic. They had to pull it within 24 hours. They trained it on social media, which in retrospect was probably not a good idea. Oops. They've gotten more sophisticated than that. But so we've had kind of chatbots for a while, but it was only until 2017 some Google researchers came out with what's called the Transformer paper. The T in GPT, and that just changed everything. It was this breakthrough, kind of like, oh, let's just kind of predict the next right answer kind of thing, and that was a step change. It went from, okay, we're struggling with these things are getting slightly better, but when that was embraced, OpenAI, other companies realized like, oh my God, this changes the game. No one could have predicted in 2016 that this paper was coming out in 2017, and I feel like we've gotten so far on neural networks. We've gotten so far in, kind of let's call it the transformer/neural network era. I do think there needs to be another breakthrough or two, before we can have these things be more trustable. By the way, I should add, so the the rope example, the model was interesting. It was saying you should seek help. It was a 16-year-old kid who was talking to ChatGPT, and it did say you should seek help. At the same time, it was like, oh, well, if you want to hang yourself, you need a rope this strong, and here's how you tie it to a doorknob kind of thing. So it was kind of doing both at once. It had been trained, and like, yeah, if a human was there, like, okay, we're not talking about how to do it. Okay, let's talk about how to make sure you don't do it. And again, OpenAI is working on that. They've done their mea culpa. They're already saying they're going to have models for under 18 that'll have extra guardrails on it. And so, we're reacting. We're not like, they're not being indifferent to it. But I think it's a more fundamental problem. These things are amazing, but they're not quite there yet. Mm-hmm. For tests like that, I use it every day. It's a great editor. I iterate ideas. I'm thinking of this article, help me hone, my angle, or go back and forth. Sometimes it gives me a nice line for something. I use it for research. I tend to use Perplexity, another one of the big models we haven't mentioned yet. Though it's kind of a wrapper. It's an AI search, but it uses GPT and or Anthropic's Claude, etc. But they footnote, and so I love that one because I could do my research, and we've all heard of hallucinations. These things are wrong a lot, but you could go like, oh, okay, Tim Castle did say that quote. It's in this article in some publication. I trust. So when I say it's not there yet, it's there for many, many, many tasks. Just this morning, just with my kids, we created some image they wanted for some one of my sons wanted for a high school paper, and it was really cool. It's fun. It was amazing. It's like so quick that it does it. It's taking like hours and hours to do it by hand kind of thing. So it's very, very useful. I guess what I'm saying is like, however, you see some kid turning to it as its therapist. You see some businesses wanting it in charge of things. That's where I get scared. That's where I think we're breakthrough away. I think we need a breakthrough or two to get to what people are calling super intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That resonates. I really enjoyed the part in your book about DeepMind and Solomon. And the fact, I think you said they viewed themselves as principled guardians of the public interest, working to help fix the planet, guided by principles and ethics. And that they didn't even sell to Meta, even though they got more money or offered more money. They sold to Google because they felt they were more aligned. It's people like that are guiding the future of intelligence.
Well, so DeepMind's an interesting example. So in fact, they sold, as you say, to Google because Google made them certain promises. We won't allow your technology to be used for surveillance or warfare. We'll kind of have an independent board that's overseeing our developments. Well, 2025, Google announced that yes, we will allow our AI to be used for warfare or surveillance. That independent board, I think met once, maybe twice. I think just once, and it was like to me, it's like there were these principles that all the companies had. OpenAI was founded to take on, this idea of AI in the hands of a corporation that was just going to put profit motive first. Well, OpenAI is now a big company putting profit motive first, and so they once the starter's pistol went off. Once OpenAI released ChatGPT at the end of 2022, I feel like all of that concern with trust and safety went out the window, because it then became about beating OpenAI. It became about, beating whoever was on the leaderboard, at that moment, like besting that. Anthropic, I feel, has stuck to its guns. Some Dario Modai, if I had to choose one, is the guy I trust most, as kind of the steward of these things. In fact, he's in trouble with the Trump administration right now because they won't let Anthropic be used for things like warfare, and that's upsetting the Trump administration. So I'm not saying that there's no one who still puts trust and safety first, but it really has gone by the wayside. There's been like 3 international meetings where policymakers, elected officials, the executives at some of these top companies we've been talking about meet to talk about this. The first 2 were, safety was front and center. That was the purpose of these meetings going since 2023. Well, they had one, the most recent one in Paris at the start of 2025. Safety seemed like a secondary concern. You had Vice President J.D. Vance, saying stop with the hand wringing. This is a race with China. Anything that gets in the way of AI innovation, is hurting our race with China, is hurting the potential of AI. And I think that's simplistic. I think you could do both at once. I used the example of the railroads in the 19th century in the U.S. They kept on being these accidents. People died, and people were scared to ride them. And so what the government did is okay, we're gonna put in rules. We're going to have air brakes. We're going to have technology that shows you any train that's near there. We're going to have a single track size gauge for the track. And people trusted it, and the railroads took off. And I really feel like the accelerationists, those, and J.D. Vance articulated the acceleration in this perspective, anything that gets in the way of AI is almost like a crime against humanity, given all the good that we've done. I think they're getting way ahead of the public. They're dismissing the concerns and fears of the public. And I wish there was more hand-holding. Okay, I understand it, but don't worry, we're putting into place these guidelines so kids won't kill themselves, and we're going to make sure. And instead, it's get out of our way. There's a lot of money to be made. You're slowing us down. China. I guarantee you something bad is going to happen with AI. I mean, a kid killing himself is something bad, but I mean something global, just to make one up, $1 trillion is siphoned off the global monetary system before a human can blink. One of these AIs, it could kind of help create a new cure for a disease, can also create a bioterror element. It could create a pathogen that could harm a lot of people. I think it's inevitable that something bad is going to happen, and at that point, I fear that the public sentiment is going to be to lock down AI. Whereas if we had a more nuanced approach, this stuff could do amazing things. Let's talk about the amazing things, but let's also talk about the steps we're taking to build trust, right? Personal agents, what does that mean? It's well, they'll be like our personal assistant. They'll know everything about us. That's the whole idea of a personal assistant. They know all your preferences. They know everything about you. Well, if we don't trust these things, are we going to give it that information? Like I said before, if it's fearful that we're not going to be, the Uber members of the planet, right? There'd be this thing that's smarter than us. And so there's a lot of fear, and I really think the accelerationists, the Zoomers, are making a strategic mistake by not reassuring us more and hand-holding us more, and making sure there are just basic guardrails in place so we feel safer, just like the railroads did in the 19th century. The railroads fought that, but it ended up helping them.
Yeah, you make a really important point, Gary. And something that came to mind is just like we're speeding ahead. It's almost like a sphere. It's expanding both ways, both accelerating and then bad as well. If it can go that way really fast, it's also going that way. It's just hidden. It's just in a shadow, but it's going both ways and expanding outwards. And so the potential's here. It just hasn't been activated yet. But it just takes one day that loop is going to flip and it's going to be a big scale. Yeah. What about the productivity gains though? We talk about the economy, we talk about like GDP. What about these potential, 30% in growth in GDP that comes from AI? Everyone's betting on that.
Yeah, well, the early results are there isn't really much productivity gain. In fact, the one that shocked me is like, this whole idea of vibe coding. Like, I don't think I'd be this great coder. I'm not a coder. I actually started as a computer scientist. I dropped it in college, went off to political science. Oops. But not my best career move. But anyway, it's but a computer scientist, someone who knows what they're doing in programming, using as a co-pilot, one of these models that could code so well, I thought like, oh my God, is that like a 40% productivity gain? I think we've all heard about this, like, you start to type something, it fills out the line for you. It makes suggestions like, oh, you're doing an if next loop. Like, isn't this what you want? And you're just like, yes, that's it, click. And like, I thought it would save you so much time. And the study showed that actually it costs them time. That there's, I guess, spending so much time, this part I'm making up, I guess they're spending so much time, kind of negotiating, figuring it out, assessing, that it would have just been, they would have been faster because they compared it to a control group that did not use, a model to help them code. So it's kind of one of the great mysteries. I don't doubt over time it's going to be a huge productivity gain, or at least, it's going to amplify the ability of employees that, another thing you asked about myths before. I think something that we get wrong is like, in the short term, it's going to be people using AI who best people who don't use AI. Because I feel as a journalist, I'm faster, right? It's like if I have this, powerful intern that could do all this research for me. Hey, tell me everything I need to know about subject A, kind of thing. Finds all these clips for me. Hey, sum it up. I give it a 20-page technical paper. Hey, can you, and AI is particularly good at this, can you summarize this for a non-technical person? Like, instead of, go find typos, go give this article I wrote a last read and stuff. And so I feel it's more productive, but maybe it's not. Maybe I'm just fooling myself that I'm wasting so much time, plugging in inputs, kind of going, comparing, where if I just read it myself, it would go faster. But I do believe, even if it's not showing up in the data yet, it's not showing up in the studies, I do believe that, people could do more with less if they're using AI. A lawyer using it to look up cases. I think we're up to, like, in the US, 300 or so examples of lawyers filing a brief with a made-up citation. And so, like, to me, oh, that's an interesting case. Maybe I should go click and read about it to make sure it actually exists. But if you take that one extra step and make sure that it didn't fabricate this case, this argument, I have to believe it really will help. Like, okay, you've read all you've ingested my last 10 briefs. Give me a draft of my brief. And so, for this new argument, like, if it gave you a draft and then you could slowly go over it, I have to think a lawyer would be faster. But it's not really showing up in the data yet.
Yeah. So what about these salaries that are getting banded around? Like, these huge salaries. Like, right now we see poaching going on between Elon Musk's Grok and Meta and the AI and all of that. Like, it's hundreds, like, these insane numbers. Is that new?
It's new in just the size of the contract. Like, I think Meta, to steal someone, I think it was from OpenAI, but I'm not 100% sure. I think that's the way it went down. Paid this top researcher like a contract of $250 million. I think it was a 5-year, $250 million. Like, quarterbacks in the NFL in the U.S. get $50 million a year. I'm not sure there are any movie stars who get 50 million. Maybe we're up to 50 million, but I guess what I'm saying is like, they're kind of the new stars, right? They're getting these salaries that maybe movie stars get, and kind of the stars of our sports are getting. But I'm not saying Meta is wrong. I mean, maybe this one person can make the difference. Another thing that's going on, this is a little bit more subtle, but it's the same thing. I love the term acqui-hire. And it's this idea of a bigger company buying a smaller company, less for the technology and more for the talent. We want to buy the talent of this. And so the $250 million contract sounds high, but Google bought Character AI, or actually it's a little more complicated than that. They kind of license, and they gave this company billions of dollars to bring back two engineers who had been at Google, went and co-founded Character AI. A couple of years later, Google, paid the company several $billion to bring those two engineers back. And Character AI is an interesting company. It was not exactly burning down the world. It wasn't worth several $1 billion to buy, but Google wanted the talents of these folks. And it's a talent war. It's many things, but in one way, it's a talent war. It is humorous watching the ego battle between Musk and Altman. It had been between Musk and Zuckerberg, but now Musk has a new chieftain to take on. And it's almost like every week you read about a new poaching, and it's all personal. You stole mine, so I'm going to steal yours, kind of thing. Good news for the engineers of the world who are talented and is taking advantage of this moment.
That's it, Gary. Final question. What should my kids do? I've got two boys. What should they do? They're young. I've got to advise them, Gary, and we're looking at the world as it's rapidly going ahead. There's trillion-dollar companies on the horizon. What should they do?
So I have two boys. They're both in high school, some perhaps a little older than yours. And my joke to them was like, become a plumber, become an electrician, do something with your hands. The one thing robots are no good at is like fine motor skill. And so I do imagine that, for decades to come, we're going to need folks who do more manual work. They work with their hands. But, the truth is, I want my kids to be anything that makes them happy. It's really hard to imagine a profession that won't be impacted by AI. I guess you could be a musician. No one really wants to see bots play music. It'd be interesting to see, but we still want human music.
Yes.
Art, the example I love is in 1997, a computer beat Kasparov, the best chess player on earth. Chess is bigger than ever. No one wants to see a computer, play a computer in chess. We want to see the humans, compete. And so, I think it'd be like the way vinyl kind of made a comeback once we had digital music. There is this kind of bespoke, because things are being made by art, music, etc., being made by computer models, it makes more precious kind of these arts or athletics competition, that kind of thing. No one wants to see a bunch of football players, whether soccer, football or US football. No one really wants to see them compete. But I think my main, so it's hard for me to say become a mathematician because AI is essentially math, but who knows in 20 years, if that's going to be a good profession to be in. The world is really going to change a lot. I'm telling my kids, use it, become proficient in it, become comfortable with it. Because I remember in the second half of the 90s, they made predictions like, oh, it's going to destroy all these jobs. It did destroy jobs, but it created a lot of jobs. And we're not looking at this mass unemployment across the globe because the internet. I think AI is going to be different. I think it is going to be a net negative because blue collar, white collar, pink collar, every profession is going to be impacted by this. But with that said, what I saw in the 1990s, people who were comfortable with spreadsheets or the internet, with technology generally, they got the jobs because that was an important skill to have. And so it's funny, when my younger son was in middle school, New York City public schools, said we forbid anyone from using ChatGPT. And I thought that was a real, everything, they lifted that. This is kind of an immediate knee-jerk reaction, like, oh my God, all these kids are going to cheat kind of thing. But I've been encouraging my kids to use it, not to write their paper, like, hey, give it a draft and get feedback. You know, you could give it to the teacher, but, you know, there's whatever, 25, 30 kids per teacher. Like what's good about this? What's bad about this? How can I improve it? I think that's a brilliant use of AI for school. You know, just like do your research, you know, using AI, you know, and just have fun with it. Like Character AI, my younger son and I, we would just play with it all the time. And he got really, you know, so on my phone, I have all the chat bots and, you know, and we would just kind of play with it. And like, he got really comfortable. So, something interesting, by the way, I don't know what this says, but there was this game like, am I human or am I a chat bot? And so you log on and they'd either pair you with another human or they would pair you with a chat bot. And it's almost like the Turing test, just to show these things are so good, you're really hard to tell between a human. Me, I was 50-50. You might as well toss a coin, you know, to whether I could, you know, choose whether it was a human or bot. But my kid, 70-80% of the time, he knew it was a bot. I have no idea why. He was 13 at the time. But like, I watched him do it like 20 times. So not a huge sample, but enough for like, okay, this is not just, you know, random kind of thing. And so I did wonder, like, this kid who I had playing around since 11 or 12, 11, yeah, with chatbots, he was really, really good at this. But I don't know what that says, but to answer your question, I really think like the answer is to use it, to play with it, to understand it, to understand how to use it, to understand how not to use it. That's good for life. Like, okay, they're fun to talk to, but I wouldn't take life advice. I ask, what should I do here? And it might give you ideas of something to do, but I wouldn't take it as sort of like a parent or a therapist or a teacher telling you what to do. This is almost like talking to a friend. Sometimes your friend gives you a good idea. Sometimes your friend, when you're a teenager, gives you this worst idea in the world kind of thing. And so I want my kids to understand how to use it in both the sense of they're comfortable using it and where it's strong and where it's limited.
Right. So yeah, improve their skill set and proficiency, and at the same time have the ability to discern whether that's good advice or not, and have that discernment and that creativity and curiosity to kind of play with it and have the fun.
Yeah, that's well put. You're saying much better than I should.
No, but like, don't let it rule your life. And that goes back to your point about power, right? It's about, don't give the responsibility all to the AI, have that discernment. And yeah, that's great advice. Well, I'm going to go roll that out to my kids now who are a little bit younger, and I can maybe get them ahead in the world. Gary, what I love about you is you are a truth seeker, someone who uses storytelling to bring forward the hidden and basically make the ignored visible. You're someone that believes stories matter, and I know that. Like your book AI Valley, like, I could not put it down. But the way you do that, like the way this is influencing, you know, understanding, culture, policy, like it's really brings everything together. And I think you're someone that's a bridge builder between big seismic forces. Like, you're giving a voice to people that are often unheard as well. And I applaud you for AI Valley. I do think it's an amazing book. I want everyone to go out and get a copy. And it's been such a pleasure talking to you today. Like, it's been phenomenal.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. This was a lot of fun, and thank you for those kind words about the book.
I worked hard on it. Yeah. Where can people find you?
Just my, www.GaryRivlin.com is one place, but the book is sold wherever books are sold. It's funny, like in the US, it's easy to find, like, it depends on the country. There's going to be Italian version. There is an Italian version. There's a Korean version. I don't know if there's going to be a Singaporean version, a Japanese version. But you can always read.
That's great.
Yeah. An Indian version. So I think the Indian version is going to be in English, but it's going to be coming out in India, which is really gratifying, right? You work so hard on a book, and just having the word spread and having kind of not just my country, but the whole world potentially have access is very gratifying. It's great to be out with you.
Yes, that's great. I love it.